want to go back. He wants to go back. I want to go back to the farm. Go back far away from home, with a milk pail on my arm. I miss the rooster, the one that used to wake me up at 4 a.m. down on the farm.
I'm Scott Boehm. They call me the old farmer. When I was growing up on the farm, there were many things I did not realize I had learned. I just did it. One of the things I learned almost by osmosis was how to sharpen tools with a hand-powered grinder. I was taught to drag the stone wheel under the tool, not push it, like it's done with powered bench grinders. Even today, I really prefer dragging the stone rather than pushing it. I believe I get a smoother and better edge on the tool. I have quite a few ways I can sharpen tools. One way is that I have a DeWalt DW758 to do the heavy lifting, such as rebeveling. The DeWalt has 2 grinding wheels which are 8-inch by 1-inch that spin at 3600 RPM. I can understand one wheel being just a little bit higher in the grit number than if I had glued bricks randomly to a wheel, but having 2 such wheels that are as coarse as these 2 wheels does not make any sense to me. One wheel is a 36 grit and the other is a 60 grit. I plan to replace the 36 grit with maybe a 150 to 220 grit wheel sometime this fall. I've had this grinder for several years and knew there were things I needed to do to make this grinder meet my standards. Today is the beginning of bringing the grinder up to the levels that should have been performed by DeWalt during the design and manufacturing process. The first step to modifying this grinder is to unplug and move the grinder to a more comfortable bench to make the changes. The bench where it normally sits is almost a foot higher than my woodworking bench that I got from Harbor Freight. I'll give an update in another video about my thoughts on some of the Harbor Freight tools after using them for a while. Now back to the bench grinder modifications. I took a picture of every step of the procedure, just in case I got interrupted and it could be some time before I might get back to work on this project. I set the grinder on the side and removed the bottom plate by unscrewing the feet. There is a starting capacitor for the motor hiding in the stand for the grinder. I just moved it out of the way and used a 10mm socket to remove the 4 nuts holding the base to the motor housing. I accidentally jarred 2 of the bolts and they almost went all the way into the motor housing. They were only sitting in a notch and could wind up totally inside the motor housing, which would mean opening up the motor housing and reseating the mounting bolts. Luckily, I have several sets of jeweler screwdrivers, and with a little coaxing, I got the bolts maneuvered back into position. It seemed like every time I got one bolt sitting where it should be, another bolt started to sneak up into the housing. It took about a half hour to get all 4 bolts lined up the way they should be. When I finally had everything in place, I threaded the nuts and washers a couple of turns onto each bolt, just to hold them in place until I had all the nuts and washers started on every bolt. It didn't take much to have them sneak off again. Once I had all 4 nuts and washers threaded, I came back with a ratchet and tightened everything down. Next is reattaching the bottom plate by screwing the 4 feet back into place. Now we can stand up the grinder. If I turned it on right now, the wheels will be spinning in the opposite direction, or be spinning upwards instead of downwards. The problem with downwards is the tool rests are positioned in the wrong place to have the wheels drag across the tool. If they had placed the tool holders higher on the shrouds facing down, I would have been able to angle the tool for sharpening or beveling with the wheel turning down. I would have been able to have a wheel drag across the tools at the proper angle. I don't have a tap and die set to reposition the tool rest, so I have to flip things around to have the wheels spin in the opposite direction so that I could have the wheels dragging. Now the shrouds need to be taken off of each side and swapped around. The left shroud needs to go on the right side, and the right shroud needs to be mounted on the left side. It really needs to be done or things won't work correctly. And before I can swap around the shrouds, I need to take the grinding wheels off and remove everything down to the arbor. We'll talk about taking the wheels off in just a minute. The first couple of steps are the same for changing out a grinding wheel. There are 5 screws that hold the side of the wheel shrouds in place. If you're changing out a wheel for some reason, this is the side of the shroud that needs to come off. Then the wheel comes off. Since I was swapping the shroud side to side, I need to take off the complete shroud. The grinding wheel is held in place by an arbor nut and then a washer. Sometimes the nut and washer is one unit. The grinding wheel slides off. On the back side of the wheel is another washer and a bushing that is used to hold the wheel in position. The back side of the shroud is held in place with 3 screws, which are not difficult to remove. I skipped over the fight of the century getting the arbor nut loosened. It took me about an hour to get the nut off. First, I tightened 2 wood screw clamps, sometimes called Jorgensen clamps, to the wheel to hold it from turning. I was careful to see how the threads ran on the arbor so that I would not turn the nut the wrong way. First, I tried with what we all call channel locks. These were big pliers. It couldn't turn the nut. Next, I tried what we all call a crescent wrench. I snugged the wrench down onto the nut for a tight fit. I could not turn the nut. I did not dare use an impact wrench because it could damage the grinding wheels. I forgot I had a crescent-style wrench that could turn the Statue of Liberty 90 degrees or be a boat anchor for an ocean liner during a hurricane. I don't use this huge wrench very often, and out of sight, out of mind. It would have loosened the nut. But it was time to pull out the big weapons of deconstruction, my Harbor Freight 3/4-inch socket set. I think it was designed for the Zilwaukee, Michigan's old Bascule Bridge so that it could be raised and lowered for the passing of ships on the Saginaw River before they rebuilt the bridge with a higher span. It took an 1/1/16 socket, and with a socket lever designed by Archimedes to move worlds, the nut loosened up quicker than a politician can stick his hand out for money. Once I wiggled the wheel off, there was a washer and a bushing that I wanted to keep together with the parts. I placed these parts all in a specific location so that I would not get confused which parts went where. I turned the grinder around to the other side and did a repeat and rinse operation. Since I had figured out what was needed to be done on the first side, the second side took no time at all. I then took the first set of components, which I unmounted from the other side, and assembled them on this side of the grinder. By being careful, I kept the apparent position of the 36 grit and the 60 grit wheel. This way, for grinding purposes, the wheels were in the same position as before. I forgot that the arbor nuts were threaded for each side of the machine. I think I tried for 10 minutes to mount the nut on the arbor, only to realize I had the wrong nut. When I finally got the proper nut, it went on quickly. Let me state as strongly as I can, I'm not recommending this to anyone. I'm only showing you what I needed to do to make this grinder work as I think it should. I won't leave the shrouds off the grinder for any reason, besides holding the tool rests in place. It's a shield to protect me if a wheel disintegrates while the grinder is turned on. I am keeping my best eye on everything. I will carefully watch for any changes that are happening that could create a safety issue if ignored. I do want to make spark guard adapters so that the sparks will stay inside the shrouds for as long as possible. For now, I will be careful and make sure that the sparks don't set the cupboards on fire until I make the spark arrestor adapters. I will make sure there are no flammable materials close enough for sparks to start a fire. With the wheels repositioned so that they can turn the other way, I find I can sharpen better and also faster. If I have to stop after sharpening, I don't have to use as many strokes. With the wheels turning in the traditional manner, that is downwards, there is a greater chance that a tool could be thrown back at me and cause bodily harm or even death. The worst that could happen with the spin reversed is that a tool could get jammed up against the shroud underneath the eye shield. I think this is a better approach for a bench grinder. As with any power tool, be alert. Check the machine over carefully before using for any misaligned or loosened parts. Listen to the sound of the tool while operating and stop if there's an unusual sound occurring. Lastly, use common sense while operating the tool. If you don't know what common sense is, have someone else do the project or chore for you. We all make stupid mistakes where we get away with it without harm. If you're lucky enough to slide by, learn what you did wrong and mentally rehearse how you should have avoided the situation, because next time you may not be so lucky. I think I learn more from my mistakes than I do from just about anything else. Maybe it's because I'm considered old, or maybe old-fashioned. I have opinions about equipment, and I don't like manufacturers to mess around with the way tools should work and force me to use tools in a way that I disapprove. I don't like how Stanley Black & Decker spin the grinding wheels in the wrong direction. I don't like their design of many things, and I feel in many instances their procedures are more dangerous than the way I think they should be. My grinder is a good example. I don't like metric sizes, especially when they don't prominently display the piece of equipment has been made to metric standards. Granted, if they add any more warning labels to the tools, they will have to increase the strength of the tool to carry the extra weight. So maybe remove the warning label in Sanskrit and let us know this machine was built on the metric system. Actually, with the amount of tool parts that they purchase every year, they could demand that components will be made to SAE standards, not metric, and it shouldn't change the price point. It comes down to this for me. There is so much competition for product that is for sale that I need disqualifiers so that I can narrow down the field. I've just added a new disqualifier, stupid on-off switches. I won't buy something that has that stupid plastic bubble for waterproofing a switch. Do it the right way, or you'll be disqualified because of improperly designed equipment. Also, I don't buy bubble pack packaging. You know, the stuff that can slice open your hand and that we all hate? Don't tear the packaging off in the store. Just be blind to anything packaged this way and don't buy it. A 5% drop in sales will panic companies into finding out what's wrong. We can create change in the marketplace. If you don't like something about a product, send the company an email. Be sure to be nice about it. They do track such complaints. If a company like Stanley Black & Decker, who just plug parts together, won't change some of their tool design and practices, then as far as I'm concerned, they can just go away and join the buggy whip manufacturers. It's not that I have negative feelings towards them. I don't. What I'm saying is they are irrelevant. I just don't think of them. They're off my radar. I buy things that make my life better and easier, not to have something that argues with me. That's why I don't use Windows or Apple computers. I use Linux. Once you get the hang of it, it's easier and better than anything else in the computer world. In fact, YouTube uses Linux computers to run YouTube. The type of Linux for servers is usually called Apache. But back to the workbench grinders. It's annoying that I have to take the time to undo things that are a bad design, and that I have to pay to change out a grinding wheel because they didn't feel a coarse grind and at least a medium grind matters. They designed the grinding tool to grind in the worst way when they could just as easily, at no additional cost, make the grinder better, at least to my way of thinking. Just because most other manufacturers build their bench grinders the same way doesn't give any single manufacturer a pass on how they have their grinders built. If I know I'm going to use a tool often, I don't mind paying extra for quality, but I will not pay for their ego. That's why I will not buy Festool. They are using an inflated price as a gimmick to make people think their tools are better than they really are. I'm not disputing the tools aren't quality tools. They're comparable to Milwaukee quality. The same thing is true with Snap-on tools. Good tools, no argument about that. Some of Harbor Freight tools or Tecton tools are as good or better than Snap-on tools, and that a Festool. Earthquake half-inch air impact wrench is one of the better-made tools in the world, better than Snap-on. Made in America is also a gimmick to raise prices. With automation, American-made should be priced lower with higher quality products and with good salaries for the workers. How? Shipping and tariff are not cheap. Automation can make it possible for the unit cost to be lower and therefore price lower than imports. It was this way a couple of decades ago. It can be so today. I'm going to keep a very close eye on the arbor nuts. In this setup, they could loosen and cause problems. If I notice the nuts loosening, I might try something along the lines of what everyone calls Loctite, or whoever makes your brand of hold-down juice. I did a quick adjustment of the tool rest, which can now be at the proper angle for sharpening tools. As you can see, I didn't even use the tool rest to do this test sharpening of a garden hoe. You know, I'd like to hear what you have to say about reversing the spin on a power grinder. If you do comment, please give your reasoning. I really would like to know. So until next time, this is the old farmer Scott Boehm. Be well.